So the impression I'm getting is that the feelings about this season of Picard have been a little bit mixed among Star Trek fans. So if you don't like what I have to say, I hope you'll set your comments to stun and not kill. I've been going really lame with the opening jokes lately. Okay, anyways, I have now finished the first season of Star Trek Picard. And up to this point, I've talked about, to some degree, episodes 1 through 6, so I am going to be talking about the last 4. I'm probably going to be mostly talking about the finale, so I guess that's your spoiler warning. I will touch on some of the stuff that happened up to that, but there'll also be a lot of my thoughts about the thing overall as it exists as a complete season now. If you want my broad thoughts before I start getting into any things that will qualify as spoilers, I liked more than I didn't like. And even the things that I didn't love, I didn't hate. They just sort of left me being like, was that the best way? Sort of thing. Nothing made me angry. But again, to remind people, my fan relationship with Star Trek is much more ancillary than, say, my fan relationship with Star Wars or Marvel or Doctor Who. I enjoy Star Trek. I grew up with Star Trek. I've never been a deep-cut fan of it. And there's actually, aside from the movies, there's no segment of Star Trek that I have encyclopedic knowledge of. There's no series of Star Trek that I've seen every episode of. So if you think that invalidates my opinion, that's a weird thing to think, but if that explains the discrepancy between what I thought of this and what you thought of it, if you happen to be a bigger fan of a much bigger swath of Star Trek, that might account for it. Let's go with that. So, for the most part, I still enjoyed this, and I had been liking it up to this point. I like the general feel of it. I think it does a good job of moving things forward for the Star Trek timeline, which it's frigging needed to do forever, and anchoring it on Picard as a character worked very well because Patrick Stewart did an excellent job of slipping into this. And even though this story overall is a bit darker and a bit nastier than I would personally usually want out of a Star Trek story, it still works for me because it's dealing with kind of a nasty segment and a nasty time, but I don't think it does what, say, Logan did. And this is not a knock on Logan. I actually think Logan's a great film. But Logan took the characters that we knew and took those characters and broke them and put them in an awful world. I don't feel like Star Trek Picard breaks the characters that we know. It presents them in a way that is either consistent with what we've seen from them in the past, or feels like a pretty natural progression, at least as far as I understand these characters, puts them in a situation that is worse and darker, but it doesn't break them as characters. Unlike having Professor X swear in Logan, Picard is, he's still Picard. He's still identifiably Picard, and that works very well for me. Is there swearing in this? Yes. Does all of it work? No. Like the admiral or the commander or whatever she is who swears at Picard, her I buy, because that's just who you are as a person. But when other characters would swear, it would throw me off. It didn't always feel like it belonged there. So sometimes that was a little weird. But overall, I did enjoy this. Not all of the characters are great, and some of them, by the time it was done, I didn't know what to think or feel about them. So let's go through the cast aside from Picard, who I think is done very well. Rios, dug him. I also like all of the different holographic interfaces for the different functions of the ship, but I like how they're all slightly different in personality, and some of them even have different accents. I had a lot of fun with him. Honestly, and I'm not saying they should actually do this, but I would totally watch a spin-off that was just him and that ship arguing with the holograms. That's the series. I would watch that. I'd have fun with that. Rafi was fine. I don't know exactly what it was she brought functionally to the story, though. she's not a distraction. She doesn't take anything away. So there's no harm in having her there. But I don't really know if I can nail down what she was intended to bring to the proceedings. She seemed to be an occasional exposition dump, and I guess she kind of helped with some of the logistics in the first half, but then the question becomes, well, why is she still here after that? And again, I'm not saying that they should have ditched her, because it's not like having her around is a bad thing, but I feel like they didn't really know what to do with her after a certain point, but she was just still there. And again, not a problem, just a little bit of a, if you were going to keep her around, could you have found more use for her? Other than just basically being the additional member of this plan that could have happened without her, which seemed to be what kept going on with her over and over and over again. So, Elnor, he just never clicked for me. Like, conceptually, I think he's a cool idea, but it really does feel to me like they wanted to somehow put Legolas in Star Trek. And then they just tried to reverse engineer, how do we do that? And he just doesn't really click for me. I don't know if it's because he feels out of place as a characterization, or if it's just because the performance was wooden. I don't know. He just never really worked for me. Unlike with Rafi, I get why he's there. I get his utility to the narrative, but I also didn't enjoy his presence as much. So you kind of have a nice little contrast going on there. Whereas Rafi, I enjoyed her presence, but I'm not always entirely sure why she was there. Whereas Elnor, I understood why he was there, but I didn't actually like him. So, yeah, bit of an issue there. Agnes is a character I am super conflicted about, because I feel like the show couldn't, or I don't know if it couldn't, or if it just decided it wasn't going to decide on its own how we were supposed to feel about her. It tries. What it tries to do is make her kind of tragic, in the sense of, she gets shared this vision that convinces her that synthetic life cannot be allowed. And she believes that so wholeheartedly that she kills a friend and lover because he might at some point recreate, or maybe already has created, synthetic life. But then she basically snaps out of it as soon as she meets Soji in person. And I think that's the component that doesn't quite work for me, because I will buy that this vision, projected via mind meld, was so immediate and visceral and literally burned into her brain that she did do something that under any other circumstances she never would have done, and it broke her up to do it. But the ease at which she snaps out of it just by meeting and starting to talk to Soji, I get what they were going for. Soji basically reaffirmed all of the things that she was passionate and cared about before she was shown this vision. And so I get what they're trying for, but it's too easy. There isn't enough of an internal conflict from her, and I feel like the fact that she killed a man is kind of brushed aside by the narrative, by the supporting cast, and by her. And I'm not saying she shouldn't have been granted forgiveness for that, but it felt like it came too easy. And then she had slipped back into her slightly awkward charm a little too soon for how much they broke her as a character. To have her repair as apparently easily as they did, that didn't quite click. I can see the progression they were going for, and it's not a bad one. The execution doesn't quite land, though. And it really threw me off when she kissed Rios, at the very end of the last episode. I was like, what? I don't know if I just had blinders on and had missed something, but I was like, where the hell did that come from? That felt very unearned. And not necessarily like it came out of absolutely nowhere, but I feel like we jumped a bit there. That should not be there quite yet. No. Soji suffers from the problem that a lot of characters like her suffer from, which is that she is as much a plot device as she is a character in her own right. And a big part of her characterization is figuring out who she is, which unfortunately, as a result, makes her a bit of a blank slate, which the narrative needs her to be, because she needs to be malleable enough that she is willing to trust Picard and go on this journey, and then we have to seriously be able to believe that she would effectively betray Picard in order to bring about this thing that's going to wipe out all organic and non-synthetic life in the universe. She has to be malleable enough for those leaps to work. And I think she is, but that pretty much always creates a character who is not excessively compelling in and of themselves, because they have to have the wiggle room to make those jumps, which tends to make them a bit undercharacterized. I honestly felt that Daj had a much stronger characterization in only one episode than Soji did across the remaining, 9 episodes. It's a little bit of Clara Oswald syndrome, if you're a Doctor Who fan. This whole thing where, like, we get introduced to alternate versions first that are way better characterized, and then we get the quote-unquote real version, the one we're going to be stuck with for a while, and they seem undercooked and underdeveloped, and then they don't get to develop as much because they're a plot point, as much as a character, if not more so. I really did get flashbacks to Clara with that. So, again, I understand why it happened, for the narrative, for what they were going to be doing with her, but it does result in a character that is difficult for me to really latch onto. The villains were fine. I mean, let's be honest, Star Trek as a general rule is not known for its villains. There are a handful of really good ones. The Borg collectively, Khan, but, you know, by and large, villains have never really been Star Trek's strong suit. At least not individual villains. Collective villains, like the Klingons, the Borg, the Romulans, those can work, but when they try and make individuals strong villains, just the franchise doesn't have a great history on that. They're not bad. The Romulan brother and sister, they're okay. They work. They function. That's about all I've got to say about them. 7 of 9 I had a lot of fun with. Now, to be fair, I've seen very little Voyager, so I can't speak to whether or not this characterization makes sense and feels earned from where she was when she left off. I can't speak to that. I can just say I had fun with her. As far as the other returning characters, it was nice to see Will Riker and to see Deanna Troi. That was nice and cool, but I gotta say though, I got a much bigger, despite a whole episode of them like kicking back and Riker trying to make pizza or whatever, I had a much bigger grin on my face when he shows up at the end in the captain's chair. Man, he still looks good in that uniform. Oh, you know, doing the commanding captain voice. Oh, I'm so glad they gave us that, because I didn't dislike the scenes with Riker prior to that, but I was kind of like, something's missing. And then he showed up again in the uniform, in the chair. You know, oh, give me an excuse. I'm like, that's what I was missing. Oh, that felt good. So, the overall conflict and sort of resolution of it, I have incredibly mixed feelings about. So I'll address one thing first, which I think is a nitpick, and I don't know if it's shared among the community, but I watched a Linkara episode recently where he made reference to it. It obviously irked him. But the idea that a synthetic does a mind meld, I'm personally kind of okay with. I'm prepared to make that leap, because we're already accepting that they made synthetics that can eat, drink, they get tired, sweat, and all this other stuff that we have with Soji and Daj. I'm like, is it that much more of a leap that if they're already making synthetics that can do all these things that synthetics shouldn't be able to do, that it's that hard to believe they could also figure out how to make the mind meld work? I do think that in episode, it's a very hand wave thing, like, oh, she has studied Vulcan. Like, that's a lame sort of stopgap explanation, but conceptually, I'm okay with that. So where I'm conflicted is, I think the show really kind of set itself up to stumble at the tail end by even finding this civilization of synthetics. Because it's one of those situations where basically only one of two things were going to happen. They were going to turn out to be a utopia, or they were going to turn out to be a problem. And it kind of tries to have it both. Have it start to appear as a utopia and become a problem. And so it's already kind of muddling a little bit And while that kind of progression of, oh, this place seems great, wait, there's a problem, that's normally fine. But the issue here is by having them shift to becoming a problem, is it validates the villains. It makes the Romulans right. And while this storyline doesn't validate the Romulans' tactics and their brutality, it does validate their motivations. And that was disappointing to me because initially they had this notion of, when that synth, I forget her name now, played by the same actress who does Soji, did the mind meld, like, the preface to that was, this is a vision that drives non-synthetics mad because they're not meant to experience it. Let me see. I'm like, oh, it's going to be recontextualized. Except it wasn't. Really. Like, we got better details as to what it meant in terms of them bringing in this other dimensional, somehow higher creation level being of synthetic things to this world, but that just gave background to and completely validated what the Romulans always thought, which was that synthetics would bring about the destruction of everything else. So it didn't recontextualize. It just totally validated the villains, which would also make this really hard to rewatch because as we are watching our heroes escape the villains and try and go, they're leading things down the path that is going to get everybody killed. And that's kind of disappointing and kind of frustrating. So I didn't love that, but at the same time, I do kind of like that the ultimate resolution to that was Picard being the diplomat, not the tactician. That he finds a way to reach Soji and the people who need to be reached and stopped, not by force of arms, but by being the example. Because that is very Picard, much more so than any combat tactics he could have engaged in. So I don't like the nature of the conflict at the climax. I do, however, like the way that they resolved it. So that's why I'm very torn on it. The situation I don't like. I don't like how we get here, and I don't like the situation that we're in. But I do like the way that Picard resolves it. So I don't like it so much that it suddenly justifies the situation that we're in. I still don't like it, but that was a good way to get us out of it. So, again, very mixed feelings. I will also say that at the end, the whole... So basically it's Deus Ex Machina resolution of, well, let's remove the tension of this brain abnormality and just give him a synthetic body. Oh, but don't worry, it's effectively the exact same as the body he had, so he's not in any way different. He's not superpowered or anything. We basically just gave him a free life. It's kind of cheap. But again, conflicted, because as cheap as that is, to the point that it actually kind of makes the entire brain abnormality subplot unnecessary for how easily it was resolved with no lingering consequences. But at the same time, I love the scene with him and Data. I thought that was the best scene in the entire thing. I thought that was beautiful. I really, really loved that. I loved the way they connected, the way that Data was able to explain to him, enough about himself that it gave Picard closure and it gave him resolution. And it was, oh God, Brent Spiner. I mean, I enjoyed him as yet another Sung. Like, boy, the Data family between Lore and B4 and Noonien Sung and now Noonien Sung's kid, what a weird cluster, and we keep finding more of them. Like, they gotta stop that. But, and I like Brent Spiner doing that, he did it well, but seeing him be Data again, in the makeup, with the contacts, with the jet black hair, oh, he didn't miss a beat. And that was, I always loved Data. That was a wonderful, touching, heartfelt scene, and I really, really adored it. But again, a bit like the climax, the thing that scene is nested in, I don't really like, but that scene itself, oh, it was gold. I absolutely adored it. And I really want to see what will happen with another season. Because I feel like if you were going to pick up with Picard, bringing some sort of closure to the fact that Data sacrificed himself to save Picard was something that had to be dealt with, because that was going to be the lingering thing that never really got addressed. And Picard was somebody who was going to carry that baggage. And so what we've effectively done is we've taken an entire season to resolve his conflicted guilt and his baggage and his trauma over that. Should they have spent the entire season doing only that? I don't know. Character-wise, that's basically what they did. But what it does is it frees him, and by proxy the show, up to move completely away from past baggage and go somewhere new in a new season. Because I do think this did need to get addressed. And to not address it would have been kind of a disservice to not only Data's memory, but also Picard as a character. But now that it's done, I'm very excited to see what would happen, sort of unshackled from past baggage. So Picard, for the most part, I liked it. Have some very conflicted feelings about some of the stuff that happened toward the end, but am absolutely excited for a second season and want to see what will happen. So those are my thoughts on Star Trek Picard. Did you watch all of it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop them politely down in the comments and let's talk about it. There's the usual stuff to do. Like, share, subscribe, share this around and all those things. Hit the bell. I guess not everyone's getting notifications lately. Plus, I got a Patreon, all the usual stuff. But you don't have to do any of it. Because, end of the day, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time you care to join me in my ready room, this council is adjourned.